they're not defined by what we said they could do, but they're like inspired by what they say they wanted to do. And so I just believe the holistic development should be at the centerpiece of our approach to all education in public schools.
Thank you. Thank you, Carolina Forward, for having us. Yes, the main objective, right, and mission is to educate children, but it also, in my view, needs to be a place where children learn to be in community together, to work together, to live together, to collaborate, to become critical thinkers. I can always count on Rodney for aligning with my values. So critical thinkers is something that I had thought about this morning as I was thinking about these questions. But so many things, I believe the mission of the public schools and public education involves things that you are not going to see on a standardized test. And those things have just as much value as the graduation rates and the test scores and the academic achievement.
So far we've talked a lot about we've talked a lot about kind of the individual and like who in schools is getting like what they're getting out of schools. Speak up. Alrighty, yelling now. But I also want to talk about public schools as an investment in our state, right? We're not just educating kids for the sake of educating kids, which is very, very, very critical and important and not to be denied or minimized, but it's because we want a North Carolina full of people who are able to live up to their individual potential, whether that is independent living, whether that is a job, whether it's just being able to evaluate the candidates in election and think critically about what they're saying and make good decisions for our state and our populace as a whole. So our public schools don't just serve the children in them, they serve every single person in this state. And they are for creating a better North Carolina.
Okay. Well, good morning, everyone. Yes, I totally agree with everyone that has spoken. Wanted to share what I think. First and foremost, the purpose and mission of education is to be all-inclusive. And that means that no child truly not left behind. That means that every aspect of who that child is and where that child comes from, regardless of that child's social economic background, that child should be given the same equitable and equal access to every opportunity to excel, to create an educational foundation, to be able to make those choices that we're talking about, to be able to see themselves as part of the change agency that goes on with making policies and procedures that's going to impact their very lives. So for me, it comes from grounded inclusion, and that if you leave one out, then we are not serving the total population that we say we are committed to serving. And so for me, that is one of the primary reasons I think inclusion and access is the primary reason for what we do and what educators are supposed to do and what North Carolina public school system is set up to do. Thank you.
Absolutely. I think all of that is exactly what we want our public schools to be doing. And one of the things that is discussed around public schools is workplace preparation, preparing students for the future workforce. And are we doing that in our schools currently? And if we are, what can we be doing to do it even better?
Well, I think some of your class offerings kind of go towards that, in terms of your elective classes, your CTE, computer skills, things of that nature. But if you ask me, what I would like to see more of an emphasis on, and you probably get this more so in high school, I teach middle school, but more of an emphasis on being able to effectively communicate, not only verbally, but written-wise. Sometimes our children struggle when it comes to being able to communicate with the written word. Again, I teach middle school, so when it comes to those essays, they don't they don't like writing them, and you're trying to get them to understand, hey, that essay could be the difference between you being able to pursue an opportunity like a scholarship or something of that nature on your job when a promotion comes open, when a position becomes open that you can get promoted to, than someone else. So what I would like to see more of an emphasis on are those types of skills as it relates to the workplace development, as it relates to being able to pursue opportunities within your career as a student or within your career once you become a part of the workforce.
Certainly want to echo some of those same sentiments. As I'm sitting here thinking about and processing that question, you know, we talk about, are we preparing kids for the workplace? Again, I'm currently in a middle school, but I spent probably 19 of the 22 years of my career in a high school setting. And I can't emphasize the number of times, not only, you know, students in my building, but also across the board, that I've been on scholarship committees, and you're interviewing students and they didn't possess the social skills to truly articulate who they were. You know, students 3.8, 3.9, 4.0 GPAs, but couldn't articulate and be an ambassador for themselves. And so now that I'm in middle school, I realize the urgency and the importance of helping the kids develop soft skills, like the ability to simply have social skills, the ability to simply like make eye contact when you're speaking. And so I think that's all critical, because as our students navigate from our schools, as they go into these positions of advancement, whether it's educational, career, as they're interviewing for the Park Scholarship, if they can't properly articulate what it is that they're trying to say or convey, then a very talented and gifted kid may be left behind because of the lack of a soft skill. And so I believe that one of our charges should be that we develop, again, it goes back to holistic development, that we develop our kids socially so that they're able to articulate and able to truly be true ambassadors for who they are, so that they don't have to rely on someone to just read their resume to get like some type of biographical sketch of who they are, that they can actually speak it and let the room know who they are.
I agree with all of that. I also go back to what I said earlier. We've got to teach our kids to be collaborators and to be in community together and to work together. That prepares them for the workplace. And as some of our leaders, state leaders, seek to further segregate our students and keep them siphoned in particular groups where, you know, they only go to school with children that look like them and came from the same experience as them, that is not preparing our students for the workplace. So it does require those soft skills, as you said, and, you know, again, being collaborators and being in community with each other, with people that come from different experiences and different backgrounds.
I'm going to be the one that's pugnacious and say, I'm not certain I agree with the premise of the question. I don't know that our public schools, their goal should be just workplace preparation. That's a goal for some kids, and it's a worthy goal, not to take anything away from it, but it's not the goal for every child. And we need to remember that every child deserves to be educated for their future, not just for the future that, Catherine Truitt wants for them. So we need to be making sure that students with disabilities are being educated, not so they can get a job, but so maybe they can live independently, or as independently as it's possible for them to live. For kids for whom college is a goal, and there's nothing wrong with college as a goal, that they're prepared to live in community with a broader variety of people than they might see in their own school. And, you know, just to make sure that we don't lose sight of the fact that education, for the sake of having an educated populace, is in itself a worthy goal. Jobs are great. Jobs are wonderful. You will never catch me saying, no, let's not prepare children. But let's not lose sight of that's a goal, not the goal.
Certainly, I concur with everything that's been said. And sharing my little 2 cents here, one of the things that I think we should be preparing our students for certainly is soft skills, but in my role, what I try to prepare students for is self-advocacy. I want them to be able to advocate for themselves. I want them to be able to articulate their needs. I want them to be able to be confident that if I'm not being served in this class, how do I get the attention that is necessary for me to say to the teacher, I am not being served in this class? And then how do I do that in such a way that they don't dismiss me as being rude or disruptive, you know? So I try to, as a student support agent, I advocate with the students, and I am first and foremost a student advocate. And so what I do is I channel them to think and then create a process for which, okay, this happened, that happened, how are we going to delegate? How are we going to do this situation? How are you going to carry this out so that not only that classroom teacher, but the principal and all others, even your peers, recognize that you see that you're missing something in this class, and rather than sit back, fold your arms, or have temper tantrums, let's learn how to advocate our needs and how to say, and without any apologies, hey, I'm not getting this concept. And I've told you this over and over again. And I need you. And without having to feel like they have to be taken out of the class and placed into another class, which speaks to the students with exceptional needs. We have separated our kids far too long, and it's necessary to mainstream all of our kids because they're going to live in a community with all of us and each of us. So I think it's so important that we not only prepare them for the workforce, but in preparing them for the workforce, they have to be prepared how to go into that interview and speak for themselves and to say who they are, and at the same time be able to articulate that in such a way that that person's like, oh, okay, all right, So it gives them that person that's talking to them says, wow, we can use someone like this, or a kid who can say at 15, these are my goals. These are my dreams. And while they may seem as a far reach to you, but I've been told that I can do anything that I want to do. And if I take the necessary steps and follow the necessary protocols, those things can happen. And the other thing I think we need to help our kids with that I had, many of you had, is writing. Signatures, signage. I do a annual voter registration drive at the high school. It is staggering to see when I say, okay, you didn't sign that, Billy. Yeah, I did. No, you didn't sign it. I says, you printed, but you didn't sign it. They don't know the difference. And I'm like, cursive? What do you mean cursive? And do you guys remember we were taught that? That's a formal signature, That's who I do. And so a lot of our kids, just those basic tenets of soft skills that they are lacking that I see. Technology is great, but we got to still be able to help our kids understand the art of communication, Put the text in a way, now you got to go in here and you got to talk for that job. You got to talk for that space. You got to talk for that position that you're running for. You're looking for homecoming queen or king. You got to speak to your peers. So it's the ability to articulate what you want and the strategies that you need to use to get what you want. So that's what I think we are missing in some part.
Well, and I think that discussion perfectly flows into our next question, which is outside of workforce preparation, what role do our public schools serve in our communities and for our students?
Ooh, man.
It's a big question.
I mean, there's so many different aspects to public schools. Of course, being in the classroom, my frat brother here, Brother Jenkins, being in administration. Then you have Ms. McLean down there being in student support services. There are so many things that public schools do for students that people don't know about, right? So you have the social emotional supports, you have the administrators, you have the teachers, you have the nurses, you have the school psychologists. A lot of positions that I'd like to add do not seem to be a priority to the current leadership in our state legislature in terms of fully funding them to the recommended levels of their professional associations or organizations. But to answer your question, what else should they be doing? And I'm intentional about this in the classroom when I talk about it, and it kind of speaks to what Ms. Renee said, is you need to have an educated populace that are critical thinkers. So when it comes time to put people in position that will be the elected representatives of the people that are going to influence and craft the public policy that affects all of us, whether we vote or not, whether we care or not, we need to make sure that we develop these children to say, hey, I'm not going to be moved by emotion and conjecture. Move my mind, not my heart. I'm going to think about what you're saying. I'm going to research your background. I'm going to look at what you've advocated for publicly and then how you voted privately. That's what I think is one of the things that we need to do. I guess civics and economics would kind of cover that, but I think you need maybe a voter one-on-one course just to teach them that. You know, you're not advocating any particular party or anything like that, but public education, as we all know, is political, but it shouldn't be partisan. And I think that should be something that both parties or whatever political party could get behind and say, okay, yeah, we do need them to be educated. And if they don't get behind something like that, then what do they really want out of the public schools? Do they just want dumbed down workers who are not going to challenge the people who are actually running for office, whether it's a school board member, whether it's a state senator, a U.S. senator, a congressman, a congresswoman, mayor, city council, county commissioners, all these people who affect public education in some way, right? But you got to make sure that the kids who are going to be replacing those people one day and who are also going to be voting for them know who they're voting for and are putting people in office that are going to do what's right for their families, for their communities, for their schools, etc.
Thank you.
Could you really pick up your voice, because I can't hear anything that y'all are saying. And there's a lot of ambient noise, so I want to hear what you have to say, and I know it's great, but I literally cannot hear what you're saying.
The question again? Yes. Absolutely. So, beyond job preparation, what role does our public schools serve in our communities and for our students?
Thank you. So I just want to say that, you know, the school that I currently serve at is what we would coin as a community school. Like, my school literally sits in the heart of a community. And so because of that, as I express to my students and to my teachers, like, I want our school to be a haven of hope for the community that we serve. I don't want people just to look and point and say that that's where my kid goes or that's where my niece or nephew goes. Like, I want it to be a place that's a haven of hope. And so it should be a place where parents and stakeholders should be able to come and be educated. So because of that, like, we've intentionally, like, designed programs. Like, we have a parent academy where we want to educate our parents on some of the things that's happening in schools that may be foreign or may not be foreign to them in terms of this day and age. Social media, like, a lot of parents are kind of way behind on social media and not so familiar, but that's just an example of, like, what I think schools should be. Also, you know, I'm just really big, my district is really big on purposeful partnerships. We have tons of partners who are coming to our school to make donations or to share whatever it is that they would like to implement in our kids. And not only that, but we also want to build a system where our kids are going out and serving as well. And so I think that aside from just real world preparation, real world skill building for kids, I think that school should also be a place, it should be a resource for more than just the people, the kids in your building, but it should be a resource for the community. The community should be able to look at your school and say, you know what, I have a need, and there's a need that that school can meet for me within the legal ramifications of just logistical operations of school. And so for my school, I want my school to be that haven of hope for our community. When people are down and out, I want people to look up and see W.A. Patil and realize that, hey, you know what, like, I can do this because they're doing it at that school. So I want our school to be a symbol of inspiration to our kids and to their families, because truth of the matter is, parents send us the very best that they have, which is their kids, regardless of how we perceive them, but that's the best that they have. And it's our job to create those partnerships, and it's our job to create those relationships so that parents get a sense of security from what we're doing, and our kids get some sense of inspiration to go out and contribute to the community that's grooming them to go on to be that next generation of leaders.
I love that you mentioned your parent academy. Wake County Public Schools also has a family academy, and I agree. Our public schools are a public good and should be a resource to the whole community. And as a public good, we need to invest in them as such. Our role is to raise good citizens, like Renee was talking about, being good citizens of North Carolina, good citizens wherever they go beyond, if they, leave our state. They should leave us as good citizens for our country and for our democracy. I see that as our role as well, that we are a cornerstone of democracy. And again, I'll reiterate my concerns about the privatization of education in this state, and that erodes the public good.
I do want to say, LaShawn, everything you said, yes. Just all of it. But I think that gets to, our schools are our communities. And I, as a parent of 3 kids in Wake County Public Schools, like, our social life derives from the people we've met at school. We go to community events, the science night or international night or the book fair, which was my favorite. But I bet every single one of you in this room can think of a way that your community, like your personal community, encompassed your school, whether it's going to a football game or going to a school event or a concert or a play. Our schools are our communities, and I think we all really need to internalize that, particularly as they're under attack, particularly as they're telling you that your children are being handed pornography. Really? Is that what you saw at the book fair? Did you see something weird like that going on at the football game? Really? So I just want to get back to this idea and this recognition and remembering that our schools are our communities.
I love it, Renee. I love it. I certainly concur with everything that's being said. And certainly, without community integration with our schools, I don't see the success. You cannot, a school placed in the middle of a community that is not connected to its community that's a failed school. And those are failed students. So if we are going to serve, I think it was said earlier, the whole child, then the community is an aspect of the whole child. And so community integration is necessary. And when you have the community involved in what's going on at your school, you have that support. When you have parents that are truly engaged and involved, you have that support. And when you walk into a classroom as a parent and you see a teacher having a need and she's missing, parents, we have plenty of parents in Hope County who support their teachers, and they will do whatever is necessary to ensure that that teacher has what he or she needs to be successful in that classroom. Because at the end of the day, everything that we pour out of our school and release to our community is going to reflect on us and the job that we did, whether we did a good job with our students or not, and whether we connected with our community. When we talk to our children, we're always telling our children that we want them to connect with people with like-mindedness, right? And then sometimes, as my granddaughter would tell me, maybe they don't believe what you believe, but you've taught me to just respect everybody's feelings and opinions. And for me, I think that's important, an important ingredient if we're going to be integrating our community with our students, is that we're all different, but at the same time, think of what we can do together collectively. When the community is a part of the school, the businesses is a part of the school, organizations is a part of the school, and so anything that I'm doing, I'm always promoting my school. Is there some things that needs to be done and we need changes? Of course. But overall, I just believe that if we can't celebrate where we are, then we need to find someplace else to be as it relates to our kids and as it relates to our community. Because definitely one needs the other. And without the other, I don't think there can be any success. So I think schools are important entities that definitely impact what goes into the community. It creates economic opportunities. It creates stabilities in our community from what we're pushing out. So I think it is so important. It is a critical piece of what we do.
And so that, again, kind of flows perfectly into our next question, which is that students and families and communities have individual and often unique needs. Is it possible for the institution of the school to meet all of these needs for our students, families, and communities?
I think it is possible. I'm an optimist. I have to be an optimist because I'm alive. That's a quote by James Baldwin. I think that a school can meet all the needs of the community for the most part, but again, it goes back to being properly funded and having the proper resources from not only the state legislature, but also from those purposeful partnerships that you create with organizations, nonprofits, businesses, and other entities in your community, and most importantly, the families of the children that you're serving.
Very short response. I echo the sentiments of that 100%. I don't know if you'll ever be in a school where you 100% can fund all of the needs of your students. But I do believe through purposeful partnerships, which is one of the priority standards in the district that I serve, is that if no one in the building can provide it, someone can provide it. There's a resource. So that means that maybe we should be intentional in our organizational leadership in terms of maybe specialized committees whose job is to form those partnerships. And so, and another piece of that is in order for you to know what the needs of your students and staff is, like we have to do a little bit more of needs assessment. We got to collect more data around what exactly does our school need. It's easy just to look at the surface of your school and just get like a litmus pulse of what the school needs, but that doesn't necessarily make it an individualized need if you don't know each kid individually, which is another aspect of leadership. You need to know the kids in your building. It sounds daunting, but it's really not. It's hard for me to know what a kid needs if I don't know that kid, and it's going to be hard for me to diagnose that need if I haven't formed a partnership with that kid's family. And so partnerships and equitable funding, I think we can meet the needs of all students.
I'm going to say no, because children and families need access to quality health care. They need access to secure housing, and those are things that the public school cannot provide. What we can provide when we're not starved of resources are supports, for these kids, such as more helping professionals, counselors, school psychologists, social workers, nurses. So, and we cannot do all we need to do for students on the backs of teachers. We need the support staff in our buildings so that teachers can focus on teaching, and those helping professionals can help connect families to resources within the community. I also love, schools that have a lot of wraparound services. I very strongly support that and believe in that, but not on the backs of teachers and not when we're starved for resources.
I was all ready to say yes, but Lynn, you had a good point. So I think within what the schools are charged with doing, then yes, we can do that. But it doesn't happen by magic. It doesn't appear out of thin air. And that's why there's a role for each and every one of us in this room and in the wider community. Once you accept the idea that schools are our communities, once you accept that all schools help all kids in all of our state, then you have a personal responsibility to do something about it. And to make sure that you are working at least a little bit every single day to make sure that our schools get what they need, whether that be political organizing or volunteering in the local school, even if your kids don't go there, or calling up and saying, hey, who needs tissues right now? Because let me tell you, they always need tissues. We can do it, but it's going to take us as a community coming together and making it happen.
Absolutely, absolutely. I thought about what you said in your no, and I was in my yes, but I and so I'm a little, I would say, on the fence, but I think yes, in that we can meet those needs, and no, in that sometimes when a kid has a need, if we don't have the resources, and if we don't have the connection outside of the school base, then we can't meet the needs of that family. But if we have the resources, and the resources come through, again, community engagement, community connectedness, and as student support services, I see a lot of needs come through for our students, students with specialized care. And if they're not getting that care, then we have a due diligence to refer that student to some outside resource where that family can have that child's needs met, and thereby you met the needs of that family. We have a number of homeless kids of late, and we have to meet the needs of those kids. And again, if we're stuck in a shell and just behind the door, we can't do that. And it takes community resources to be able to serve a child whose situation puts him at a homeless state. So I've transported kids to hotels, and we've found resources to pay for kids and their families, So we are meeting their families' need, and at the same time helping them to link into other resources that further provide them whatever needs they have, so that when that child do come to school, he or she is not focused on I don't have a place to sleep tonight, you know. But they're focused now that they can go in there and they can do whatever needs to be done in that classroom without that added pressure. So yes, I think we can and we can know if we don't have the resources or the connectedness to the resources to serve our kids.
I can't echo any of that more, especially because, as you know, hearing this discussion, I can imagine that if I had had a lot of these things when I was in the classroom, I would probably still be in the classroom instead of no longer in the classroom. But I do want to open it up for anyone in the audience here who may have any questions for our panel, or if anyone on our panel has any further thoughts that they would like to provide on the mission of public schools or what our goals for public schooling should be. Yes.
Third graders sleeping during the day, and also some kids arriving late every single day. So I don't know where that falls, but depends on, you have to look at, I guess that's knowing your families more.
Yeah.
It's not like sometimes I'm like, what are these parents thinking? How can you drop your kid off like at 9 something every day and then your kid's sleeping and,
Yeah.
you know.
So the question is along the lines of children sleeping in school, being tired. You have a lot of children who show up tired to school and aren't getting the sleep they need at home, and kind of what can we do to address that?
What I learned at the onset of COVID and what I continuously now pay attention to, COVID unleashed so much emotional issues for our children and our families. When I got on the school bus on a day-to-day basis to deliver meals to our students, when I saw the conditions of where our students were and the extreme poverty levels that some of our children were in, it was just mind-blowing, because you're like, wow, this is how we're missing this. And this is why this has been going on with this particular family. So when you get to know your families and you get to know the dynamics and the demographics of where they are, where they come from, then you can really serve them. A kid coming to school, sleeping in the morning, doesn't necessarily mean he's just bored. You don't know whether or not that kid has had a place to sleep the night before. You don't know whether or not that kid has eaten the night before, you know. And even bringing them to school late, you don't know how many fights that went on in that family before they could get to school. I can just give you a real quick one. Just recently this week for me, I'm an attendance monitor, right? As part of my role as a dropout prevention specialist. So when I get a referral that a student is missing so many days, my task is to follow up. I typically will go with the student first, but if the student's not on campus, I call a parent. I called the parent and made the parent aware of the number of days the student was missing. And this kid's world blew up in a matter of an hour, simply because when I spoke with the parent was, oh, okay, I'm gonna check it out. And when I contacted the student, I said, come to my office. And I happened to know the student from a personal relationship with the student. And when the teacher called and said, I need you to come to this room because she's having a meltdown. And I went to the room, and sure enough, it was just so much. And the child was pleading, I don't want to go home. So that opened up a floodgate of other issues. I'm not going to talk to her now about her attendance. That's completely irrelevant. I need to address the immediate need I'm looking at right now. This emotion, these tears, this fear. And so just going through that, you know, and so just this weekend, I said, okay, so we took care of it. We took care of it. And she didn't go home, but we know where she is. So I said, I'm going to follow up with you during the weekend. Now, is that something within the scope of what I do? Based on job descriptions? No. But is it something that you do because you care and you need to make sure that that kid is safe? So that's my task this whole weekend, is to touch in, reach in. Hey, you okay? I know where the kid is. She's safe, you know. And those are the kinds of things that when kids come to school, you can't just rush to judgment on why they're doing what they're doing or why they're not, where they need to be. Sometimes those situations that are dictating that behavior is what we need to have addressed. So.
If I could just add, that goes back to the support staff that I was speaking about earlier, because I promise you the staff in that building, that starting with the teacher that is watching that child sleeping, is going to let their support staff know that there's an issue. And so your child may not observe all of that activity that is surrounding and trying to care for the one that is sleeping or that is coming in late every day. But I promise you there are people in that building that are looking into that and doing all they can to help that student. But we've got to have more social workers, more counselors, more school psychologists, more nurses. And the state needs to provide those funds. The state needs to provide those funds.
I saw we had a question.
Actually, and I came in a little late, so I was reluctant to ask the question, but actually, you touched on it there at the end, because my question is, what do we do, what can we do to force, coerce, convince the powers that be, the legislature, to better fund our schools? I mean, I saw something where North Carolina ranks like last, if I'm not mistaken. That can't continue, but it will continue unless we, the public, the voters, demand more. That's my thought about it. Yeah.
So many thoughts.
I know, I saw Chris about came up at us.
So I've been in this space for 5 years, which is 10 minutes in advocacy time, and I get that. But move them or remove them. I move them or remove them. Move them or remove them. Sorry, that sounds like the most easy slogan in the world. But, I started out getting one law, and it took me a year of near full-time, what can we do today? And postcard parties, and talking to legislators, and coming to the building, and talking to legislators, and talking to legislators, and talking to legislators. And we did that. It requires a massive upswell of people demanding better. Stop with the, that's just the way it is. No. We deserve better, and we need to start demanding better. Forgive me, I get real passionate about this stuff. But more to the point is, we in this room, we're part of the choir. We need to make our choir bigger. We need to be talking to people in our communities, in our schools, on the soccer field, every darn day. Because most people have no earthly idea that when the legislature gets together in Raleigh, they're messing with our schools every darn day. So we need people to understand that our schools are under threat. We need to understand that they deserve better from their legislators. And I got to tell you, we got to vote. We got to get everybody out to vote. Every election.
Do y'all want to add, one of you want to add something?
I mean, it kind of just, with the what you said about voting, it kind of goes back to what I said earlier about having that voter one-on-one course so that students know, look, I'm not going to be moved by you trying to scare me into voting you into office because I'm afraid somebody's going to take something that I have. Is that person really a threat, or are you making them a threat in my mind? I can see through your fallacy, right? I'm logical. I can reason. I can think critically. So I'm going to put the person in office that's going to do the best for me, my community, my state, my family, etc. Because for far too long, we've allowed certain people to get into office. Once they get into there, they're going to do things. They're going to redistrict. They're going to gerrymander. They're going to change the rules. They're going to try to change laws to make the chief executive of our state, our governor, just a figurehead, right? They're going to try to load all the power to a particular branch of government. They're going to try to load the courts or change the structure of the courts so that they can't check and balance the three branches of government. I mean, when I talk about voting one-on-one, one of the things I always tell my students is, what are the three branches of government? Legislative, judicial, executive, what do they do? Yada, yada, yada. I said, do you know that there are people that you can walk up to on the street that are of voting age, who are registered to vote, who will not be able to tell you that? I say, isn't that scary that somebody that can vote, legally, can vote, can go into a voting booth and vote for people, but they have no idea, no earthly idea how their government works. We have to educate people on how their government works and then educate them on how to properly research the backgrounds of these candidates so that the right ones get elected. Yes, sir.
Sorry, I didn't really have a opinion on this, but you kind of resonated. So as a former civics and economics teacher, I feel that, and since this is on public, education, there are areas where our public education has failed our kids. It's no reason, and I'm just speaking from experience, there's no reason why a kid should matriculate through a civics and economics class. Not saying that they should know all their amendments, but there's certainly no reason why they should leave not knowing the Bill of Rights. Now, in my class, you're going to know all your amendments. But my point is, when you serve in marginalized communities, maybe communities that are socioeconomically low by number or by brand, the needs of people are so immediate that the thought of having to understand government and vote is secondary if I live in survival mode every day. And so for those of us who know the system and we know what needs to happen, then we need to be the boots on the ground so that people understand that your benefits or the opportunities you have are not connected to what you can be. Because if you really think about it, if we examine like systems and policies, there's a lot of policies where you have to do this to get this. And if my help and my survival is based on doing this to get this, then voting is probably not my priority. When you look at social services and how that's developed over the last 60 years, I mean, there were rules that said, like, you can't make this amount of money and still be supported by the government. And so that's by systemic design. And so it's deeper than voting, and it's like calling out all of those like marginalizations and those biases that exist in our system so that people understand that you don't have to choose survival or do I vote. You can have both.
We had one question come in here on the chat around neighborhood schools. As neighborhood schools, especially elementary schools, are being shuttered in favor of larger and magnet-style schools. It's probably more relevant to a larger county like Wake, but it might be elsewhere as well. How has that changed community engagement for the school?
I'm not sure I understand that question. We're not closing elementary schools in Wake County, so what? So I'll just speak to, when we magnetize a school in Wake County, it's usually because that particular school is under-enrolled. We have pockets of our county that are very overcrowded. And so, we magnetize a school to try to draw, a new population, more population into that under-enrolled school. I think we just discussed this last week. I think we've got 4 new magnets that we're trying to seek the national grant, to fund. But I'm not sure I understand that question. Sure.
I went to a magnet high school in Wake County, and I lived in Wake Forest, went to Southeast Raleigh. It was an hour drive. My parents weren't active at all because they weren't driving an hour after work to talk to my kids.
Read the question again. So what, do you want to, or should we move on? So Dudley Flood, who some of you know, he's a giant in education in North Carolina. I remember, hearing him speak about 15 years ago, and he said, a parent does not have to be inside the school system to be a fully engaged parent. So I don't agree that if you're a child, or in your case, where you went to school so far away, that the parents have to be on campus to be fully engaged in their child's education.
And as far as the community aspect goes, you don't have to be enrolled in a school to be part of that community. You can go to the Spring Festival at Ye Olde Elementary School down the street. You can, those things are open to the public, and I'm sure they would welcome the public, for forgive me as I forget how to speak in the middle of a sentence. They welcome public engagement in the schools. So, you know, I would challenge people to think more broadly about what community means. I get what you're saying, poster, that, you know, if your school is across town, it's harder for you to be a part of that particular community. That doesn't mean you can't be a part of a community and bloom where you're planted, basically.
Now, I'm going to do something kind of mean here. I'm going to throw a wild card, and then we'll close the panel and get something to eat. And this is kind of, I'm going to start with you, Lynn, just because like you're part of the, you oversee the largest school system in North Carolina. All by yourself, without any opposition, yeah. But I'll point out to Rodney as well. So Rodney's from Halifax County, way up in Northeast. Very different situation than Wake County. What binds the students in Halifax County or Wake County or people living in, I don't know, Burke County, Cherokee, pick one, Bertie, you know, we got 100 counties in the state, a lot of students, something like 100,000 teachers or something like that. What binds the student success and the success of schools? Why do I care as a student, as a person in Swain County, to how Hope County schools do, or how Edgecombe County schools do? What if I live in Edgecombe County? What do I care? Wake County is 100 times as large. They're a wealthier county. What binds the success of these different school systems? Why do we care? Why does it matter? And how does that affect how you do your job? And Rodney, I think you're raring to go. So from Halifax, so I'd like to hear what your response is.
I'm sorry. I'm a James Baldwin fan. I love the writing of James Baldwin. And he has a quote that says, "For these are all our children." Right? We will profit by or pay for whatever they become. So if we're not concerned about all of them, if we're concerned about all of them, we should profit by whatever they become. We should all prosper based off of what they do. They might cure cancer or develop a new business that employs a lot of people, or we're going to end up paying for it, right? By building bigger prisons. You know, they won't be able to afford health insurance, right, to take care of themselves and their families. So we're either going to profit by it or we're going to pay for it. And we have to make the choice, what are we going to do, and whatever avenue we can do, like Renee was saying, to help make it be, to help it be that we will profit by what they become. So that's why we should care what every kid in this state is getting in terms of education.
Rodney. No, I mean, he's got the great quote, but what I was going to say and will say is I don't know what to do with you if you don't care about all children. The children in Wake County are no more valuable than the children in Halifax County, and they are North Carolina's children. So how about we start there? You know, if you want to be somewhat, focused on yourself or focused on some, self-identity, then how about starting with I'm a North Carolinian, and therefore I care about how every kid in this state is educated and taken care of and provided with the resources that they need in the classroom. It really bothers me that more and more funding responsibility has been pushed down on local communities, on local taxpayers. That's happened over the last, 10 to 13 years with the state budget. And good for Wake. Our taxpayers time and again show up for our students and for our public schools by, the county commissioners go to them for a tax hike and the voters approve it and re-elect commissioners that will invest in our schools. But that's not how the system is set up to be. It should not be that way. We should be getting the full funding that the state is required to give, and they're not doing it.
To this, I would only add, please join me in being a geek and read the Leandro decision. Even if it's just like the first 20 pages or so, the judge in that case, bless him, went through a painstaking and beautifully written exposition of why our schools matter. So, read it. I know it's going to take like a half an hour, but read it anyway.
I tell you, it is so important that we have a love and concern, compassion for every child. Every child. One of the things as a mom of a daughter, when she was dating, and she would say, why do you give this guy the third degree? I says, because I need to know from whence he come and what his plans are. And I says, it's so important, and you'll understand this when you become a mom. It's so important that I understand what his parents are teaching him. What are the values he believes in? Because those values is going to trickle into this relationship with you, and I need for him to understand the values that you've had instilled in you. So when we're teaching our kids, it's so important that we understand that Hope County's kids are just as good as Halifax kids, because they're going to at some time cross paths, and what their knowledge is, the knowledge that they all receive, they can share and relate alike. How devastating it is. It's like, you got that? You did that at your school? We never had an opportunity to get that. And it does hinder those future relationships and ability to form those relationships because, again, culturally, ethnically, it is important that we teach that, you know, we're all one unit when it comes to education. And if we teach something differently, then guess what? I always say, well, it would be just my luck for you to come in with the guy whose parents just didn't teach him anything. You know, that's going to be a challenge for you to deal with. And as a parent, I'm always going to be concerned for your well-being and your best interest. And I think as leaders, politicians, we should have the same level of care and concern for every child in this entire state. Every child. Because when you limit the success and academic abilities of one child, you are trickling that to maybe 50 more children. Because just think of the impact. So Leandro isn't going away. By no means. It's not going away. We are here. We are Leandro. And it's so important that each of you meet with your legislators or those persons that are connected to your legislator and say, hey, what's going on over there in your house? You know, well, what are you guys doing? And how much longer are you going to continue to tell our kids they don't matter?
If we're going to rag on Leandro, I'm a Leandro kid, okay? I give away my age. I was a sophomore in high school when my daughter's over there laughing at me. I was a sophomore in high school when that lawsuit was filed, all right? Sophomore in Halifax County Schools, which is one of the original plaintiffs, like Hope County Schools, all right? Had no idea what was going on. I just knew it sucked when I went to school because we didn't have anything. And here I am, 30-some years later, my children are students in the same district, and we still have the same fight, right? It hasn't been settled. I think we are the only state in the country where the right to a sound basic education is in our state constitution's Declaration of Rights, right? But Leandro originally started out as a low wealth issue. Now it has slowly evolved into a civil rights issue. So are you going to deny the students and the children of North Carolina their civil right to a sound basic education? If you want to go deeper, when you were talking about following the Civil War, that was re-emphasized by I can't think of the term, carpetbagger from Rhode Island named Samuel Ashley when the General Assembly met to develop the new state constitution following the Civil War, the Reconstruction Constitution. And they emphasized, hey, we need to make sure that the schools are fully funded by the state and that students in this state, black or white, get the right to a sound basic education. So it comes right out of a time period when we were trying to do right by all of the citizens of our state, regardless of their ethnicity, their race. We were trying to do right. We were trying to undo the damage that centuries of slavery had caused. And so now here we are, you know, decades later, and we still have the same issue. We're still having the same fight. But it went from low wealth, a money issue, which is what we talk about a lot in terms of the funding, to civil rights. So imagine if we would have took care of it back then like we should have, it wouldn't have got to this point. And my last point is this. We make a lot of noise about the current party that's in control in the General Assembly and how they're not meeting that demand. When Leandro was originally filed, the other party was in control of the General Assembly and the governor's mansion. All right? So think about that as well.
Thank you so much to our panel. Can we get a round of applause for them? We will now have a brief break while we eat, mingle a little bit more, and then we'll be back for our second panel shortly.
All right, we're gonna open up our second panel here. So if you want to take your seat. All right, great. Well, thank you for joining us for our first panel. I hope you guys got something to eat. We are going to come back here for our second panel today, where we talked a little bit about the mission of public education. Now we want to talk more about the specifics behind it. We have an amazing panel up here from education leaders and state leaders from across the state. I'll hand it over here to Taylor to open us up.
Thank you guys for being here, our second panel. We have a wonderful group of people here with us. We have Brian Proffitt here, who is the Vice President of NCAE. We have Dr. Jen Mangrum, who is an educator and 2020 nominee for NC State Superintendent of Public Instruction. We have Representative Rosa Gill, State Representative from Wake County. We have Chris Nordstrom, who is a Senior Policy Analyst with the NC Justice Center. And we have Senator Lisa Grafstein, State Senator from Wake County. Let me pull up some of our questions here. Okay, so we are talking a lot about, leadership in education, how we lead on education. And so to kind of start us off, it's kind of a bigger question. What is the full funding shortfall that NC schools are operating under? Does anyone want to start off with that kind of, I would say, very crisp question?
So we heard a lot of great stuff from our first panel about all of the things we hope our public schools can do, our public schools should be doing. That all requires resources. Adequately funded schools are a necessary condition of achieving the things we want our schools to achieve. And so in North Carolina, we've had a long-running court case, the Leandro court case, running over almost 30 years at this point. And through that process, the governor did something very smart a few years ago. He said North Carolina, as the state, instead of fighting this court case, we need to work with the plaintiffs and determine what it actually costs to achieve the constitutional standards of our schools. And so they brought in some consultants. They came in, some of the leading education experts around the country, they came in, studied North Carolina for about 2 years, and they laid out a framework. They said, you need to do a lot of things. You need to change a lot of policies, especially around school accountability, support for low-income schools, and you need to increase funding by about 45%. And so that was their determination. This is the first time we've had an adequacy study in North Carolina. And that's just to meet the bare minimum of our educational standards. So what does it take to create the schools I think our first panel talked about that really allows every student to become a flourishing adult is a different question that is somewhere beyond the, about $5.5 billion above where we currently are. That is called for under the Leandro, just to meet the bare minimum basics of what's promised under our Constitution.
If anyone else wants to add anything.
I just want to say that.
You don't have to
Can
press
you-
anything. Yeah, you just hold it.
Okay. That we hear quite often that we have a budget surplus. But we have to all remember that budget surplus comes from taxpayers. And our taxpayers want to invest in our children and our school system. And if you survey the public, they will tell you, I'm willing to pay additional taxes in order for all kids to get a good basic education. So instead of us talking about a surplus, we ought to talk about how we use that $6.5 billion of investing in our children's future.
I'm going to yes and both of the things that were just said because part of what happens, I think, with the Leandro judgment and the cases that have gone up and down the course that resulted. Thank you. I should sit up straighter. Thanks, Lynn. I know. I'm just kidding. I should also sit up straighter. Part of what I think happens is Representative Gill is right. We have this surplus, this pot of money, but what we also have is a tax structure that is meant to continue to shrink, right? So right now, there are laws on the books that will cause the corporate income tax to go away. No more corporate taxes as of 2030 unless we put a stop to that. And that's going to cost us $1 billion a year that we could be spending on education. That's one example. And some of the rhetoric you'll hear around taxes in our state is we're the best state for business, and then that's because of our taxes. Well, that's false. That second part is false. Businesses come here because they believe that there's a good way of life here. They believe that the schools can and will be good here because we've had a great university system over the decades and centuries at this point. So the businesses that come here are not coming here because they want to pay zero taxes. They're coming here for these other reasons. But that's being used as a lever to undercut our tax base. And my fear is that we're not only not funding public education adequately now, but if we let these tax cuts go into effect, it will get dire, and then we'll be told, well, now we have a shortfall, and now we have to cut further, and now we have to cut further. So keep an eye on things that seem like they're off the topic, but they're very much on the topic.
In addition to, I hope you can hear me, I got a teacher voice. In addition to being the nominee, I am a teacher educator at UNCG. And I don't know that the public understands what's happening to our university system as well. They have changed the funding formula, which again is about this issue of money. My university alone is going to lose $10 million next fall. And so we have cut several part-time people, lecturers already, a lot more is coming. They also have a program, or they've hired a consultant to decide what programs across the state are worthy of being in our universities. Our Board of Governors are overstepping their role in higher ed. And so when she mentioned companies come here because not only our K-12, but we were a beacon, our university system. I met with Tom Ross recently, and he's very worried, right, that we are losing the best university system because we're going to de-invest in it.
So I was hoping to sit down there so I could go last, and I got tricked into sitting here, but I still got to go last. So that allowed me a second to kind of gather thoughts and maybe not repeat things that have been said, but go in a slightly different direction. Just really quickly, I'm here, I think, because Tamika Walker-Kelly, our president, couldn't be here, so you got the step down. Tamika's maybe watching on the screen, so I hope I represent us well. But I think the two things that I would name in addition to the more material and technical aspects that people just talked about is I think we have a significant shortfall of hope in our school system. And if you look at every school system across the country right now, you see that we're bleeding educators and folks who have committed their whole lives to working in a school system with young people, which is about the most hopeful thing you can choose to do with your life. And now those folks are leaving. And they're leaving because there's a real shortfall of hope. And I think there's another shortfall, which is about imagination. Right, because I agree with what Chris is saying about, I think you were very intentional multiple times, Chris, about saying the minimum standards, right? Like, why are we talking about the minimum standards for our kids, right? One of the things that we started talking about at NCAE is like right now the state invests something like $9,000 per kid in terms of per pupil expenditure. We want to start talking about how do we get that to $20,000? How do we double this, right? Leandro is a step in the right direction, but how do we actually talk about the needs that we actually have and not just somebody's minimum standard because our kids aren't our minimum standard? So I think that's another shortfall that we need to address right now is not just the hope shortfall, but also the imagination shortfall, because I think we can be doing a lot better than we are.
That perfectly flows into the next question, which is about what does this funding and resource shortfall mean in practical terms? So what does it mean in regards to the number of teachers and support staff we have, or bus drivers, or resources and supplies?
Anybody else want to go? I can say it. Okay. Again, I think there will be more technical answers in particular that come from Chris and other folks on the panel, so I'll try to go slightly different ways. I teach at a high school, well, my home, the high school that I taught at for the last 8 years of my career, there was two students who were shot this week and one who died. And it was another student who did it. And that's heartbreaking in every way imaginable and a reflection of the lack of hope and imagination that we have right now. But that happens because we don't have enough caring adults in the building who are able to make sure that those kids are getting what they need in the building. right? That happens because we have a campus that kids don't feel like they want to be at all day, or don't feel like it speaks to the life that they need to live in the world. And so I think, again, there's lots of consequences, and we can quantify that with respect to the number of books we don't have and the number of TAs we've lost and all that. And I'm hoping that other folks will do that better than me. But the consequences are literally at this point our kids' lives, and that's real. And for those of us that are working in the buildings every day, working with our kids every day, like, that's where we feel the consequence, because if we can't keep our kids engaged in meaningful ways, this is what the world is feeding them.
So Blair said he was a millennial. I'm not. I started teaching in 1987, and it was fun. It was the best job there could be. Both my parents were elementary educators. My mom died suddenly right before school when I was in middle school. And so I love teachers because they saved me. Teachers are the people who gave me opportunities that I wouldn't have had after that, because I didn't just lose a mom. In the process, I lost my dad as well. So we need people who want to go into teaching and they love it, and they're excited every day. So I'm a teacher educator. One of my courses that I teach is elementary social studies. First class, I didn't make them, sorry. It was part of the presentation, is we watched a film called The Neutral Ground on the Confederate statues in New Orleans being taken down. And I asked them to find the themes. What's in here? Race, obviously, but there was a lot of layers. And one of my students was Maya, who's sitting right there in the houndstooth, beautiful jacket. And as a teacher, you look out and you see who's like really going, yeah. And Maya was one of those students, right? I knew it like that moment. And so I was excited about the class. Maya can tell you if you ask her later, not all the class loved the movie. Not all the class loved the idea of an accurate history. But I left that class feeling pretty upbeat. But within a few days, Maya emails me and says, I'm dropping the class, and not because I think you said I like your vibe. But she's decided not to be a teacher. And she's not here because it wasn't a prop. She also said, I want to follow you for a day. And so today's her day. She wants to be a professor one day in a content area. But we lost her. She said, I asked her just now, I said, so tell me again, why don't you want to be a teacher? And she said, well, it's awful. Oh, I shouldn't say awful, right? That's what you said. It's just a very bad kind of situation right now, and I don't want to be in it. So that shortfall is hurting us in terms of our pipeline. We are down, we have 5,000 vacancies or so. At UNCG, when I first started teaching the introductory course, I had 200 students in elementary and middle grades. The class this semester has 45. We are at a crisis level. And in order to solve it, because of the resources, they're bringing in people, right? We'll just keep making the way to get in easier or different, but they're not solving the problem, because those people aren't staying either. The last thing I want to say is LaShawn talked about the whole child, and Jackie talked about wanting kids to be self-efficacious, confident. I ask parents and teachers all the time, what do you want kids to be? And they'll say kind, critical thinkers, like Rodney said, risk takers. And I say, so what are we doing in our classrooms to create that? And teachers, my graduate students, are just silent. Teaching has become very technical, very teacher-proof, very follow the lines, and that's why she doesn't want to be in it. And that's why we need to change, not just the resources, but rethink education altogether. Put money in it, but let teachers decide how best to teach your children.
Following up on Jan, I agree with her 100%. But the problem I have is that we don't have the leaders who understand the importance of allowing those who are experts at training or teaching our students do their job. Amen. You know, when you look at a group of leaders who probably have not been in school since their high school days, and they think because they see something on television, that's what school is like, they tend to want to change the rules. Not only the rules for how we teach our students, but what we should be teaching them. And I think that is the worst handicap we can have as leaders. And I hope and pray that those of you who are listening are able to help us make sure that we choose the kind of leaders that are going to give our kids the right education so that they can be productive citizens.
You're talking about the shortfalls created by low budget levels. I'm not going to hit you with a bunch of numbers, but I'll direct you to the website for Every Child NC, everychildnc.org. If you look under resources, there's a tool, a K-12 budget tool that shows district by district what the shortfall is between districts' current budget levels and what they should be getting under a constitutional education system. So you can see that they would have, X amount number of teachers, more money for children with disabilities, English language learners, disadvantaged students, having support staff funded at industry recommended levels. But I want to touch upon what Jen said about, mentioned the teacher vacancies have topped 5,000 teachers. That's more than 1 in every 20 classrooms that does not have a qualified licensed teacher. And that doesn't just have impacts on that classroom, that impacts across the whole school because other teachers are having to take on bigger workloads. A principal making hiring decisions is maybe not able to find the teacher that they think is the ideal fit for that position, but just finding a warm body, even though they might be certified. And, the other shortfalls with that support staff also hamper teachers' abilities to teach and take, what they should be doing to foster relationships with students and help them become flourishing adults.
Thanks. Like a lot of students, I didn't do the homework, so I don't know the answer to the question. But I guess I would say the other thing, in addition to hope, that we are short on is that we are losing the framing war about what our schools are about and what our schools should be about. And I think, I forget now, I apologize who I was talking to. We were talking about the hearings last week on the quote-unquote Parents' Bill of Rights, the Republican version. The Democratic version actually has Leandro in it, really. But the rhetoric around what people thought was happening in schools was completely off. And also off was what people are talking about in terms of what our schools are actually about. And I want to double down on what I think Renee said earlier about what our schools are about. This question, the framing problem, I think, starts to be also about when we start talking about schools as some tool of the industrial pipeline, not to be too leftist about it, I guess, but when we talk about schools as the end goal of school is we're going to produce workers. And I think we've been pushed in our rhetoric that way. And what I've been really grateful to hear today is the pushback that's not what that schools are not just about producing workers, that schools are about children who thrive, and the way that the thriving school builds a thriving community. We need to be thinking about how to frame these issues and push back on what we're hearing, because they're winning the war of words about our schools and about our teachers and what's happening in schools, and I think that's a huge gap in what we need to fill.
So we talked a little bit about the teacher pipeline and the teacher vacancies we have. So North Carolina teachers today make approximately 25% less than other comparable professions. What are the long-term effects that that this has on our education system?
Yeah, I think we've hit on a lot of it. When Jen talked about the decreased enrollments in schools of education, and the lack of interest in young folks and to go into education. Just important to remember that eliminating that gap is a central part of the Leandro plan, and one of the many things that would be solved if legislators did their job and provided kids with sound basic constitutional education.
Can I add one thing to that? I would, oh, sorry. So were you guys going to say teacher pipeline? Okay. So yeah, the teacher pipeline is really struggling. I want to throw out master's pay as an issue that really is keeping a lot of people out of the profession. They're looking ahead and seeing that there's really not a trajectory for them. So I just want to, sort of highlight that as just one thing that if you're not paying attention to policy, it seems like a small thing, and it's got huge sort of ripple effects.
Sorry, I just want to add one more thing while it's coming by. But notice the problem, I think, overall is not that teachers don't have performance pay. It is the level of pay. When you're that far below, it's about raising the overall level and not creating different schemes to have teachers compete against each other for a small slice of pie.
I agree with you that pay and vacancies is the reason why there are not too many people going into the classroom. But the biggest problem is we as elected officials do not respect the profession of teachers, of teaching. I said we.
Yeah, not we, because you do. I also think that a lot of the public does not understand that this is working. It is intentional. The idea is to privatize our schools. If we privatize and have a free market system in schools, our Republican leadership believe that, I don't know what they believe, because I don't believe them. I think that when that happens, whenever a school is about a profit, someone's not getting what they need. And so who are the kids that are not going to get what they need? Our kids with disabilities. It's going to be our ESL kids. It's going to be our kids of color. It's going to be our kids who are in poverty. And I believe that the agenda thinks that's okay. They can have a service job or they can do whatever. But we're going to worry about some of our children, and we want them to have private school or charter school. You also can't write out that, evangelical piece, right? Some of these charter schools and private schools are geared around belief systems, not curriculum that is scientific. For instance, you can have a private school that uses a curriculum called ABECA, A-B-E-K-A, and it teaches that dinosaurs and people live happily together. We don't want citizens who, in the future, that's what they learned, and we certainly don't want to pay for it, right? So I just want the public to know that, because they'll say, well, of course everybody wants schools to be successful. No, they don't, not public schools. And they don't believe that every child should have the same, someone said it might have been LaShawn, access to opportunity. And so therefore, we're in this situation. And if people don't wake up or we don't get the message out to them, I really fear. So, and I ran against Phil Berger in 2018, never being political, ran for superintendent, lost both, obviously, right? But I didn't do it because, yay, that's cool. Yeah, no, it's because we have got to get people to run. Good people who are service-minded. If we had people who were doing it to make North Carolina better, and I'm talking about any party, right? I don't think any party has all the saints, right? But if we got people who really wanted to make North Carolina better and knew that the schools and our university system is what it took, then we'd be in a lot better place. So thank you, Carolina Forward, because I know that's one of your goals.
Yeah, I think I'll try to add on to a couple of things that people name. So one, what Representative Gill named about the disrespect. I think it's important to talk about the competing worldviews that I think a number of people up here have named that's at the center of this, right? Like, teachers are underpaid, and all educators are underpaid because that's a profession that was built for women, right? And so our society relies on, right, the exploitation of women's labor and the fact that women are doing care work unpaid outside of their jobs. So it's kind of like, well, cool, let's just pile care work with unlimited, necessity and force and count on those people never letting our kids down, because that they'll push through, right? And so we have to talk about the things that are at the center of this worldview. And I really appreciate that Blair started us off with the lineages of this, and I think I heard some of it resonate in some of the things that people just named. Like, the folks who fought against the Constitution of 1868, they wanted a good portion of our kids to be owned as property, right? Like, and then when they lost that, they were really cool with our kids going into coal mines, right? Same folks, right? Same fight, same worldview, right? And the reality is if we set up a scenario in which some people are human and some people are not, right? And we tell that story to lots of people, we actually all lose, right? Some of the people who gained the most from the Constitution of 1868 were working class and poor white people, right, who had always been exploited in this state, right, but were not quite as exploited and not quite, seen as property in the same way. But that's who benefited, right? But then we tell this story that lands a little bit differently, right? And so when we talk about the role that public schools have today, it's literally the only places, y'all, where we connect across anything. Our communities are monoracial. Our communities are deeply segregated by, a class, right? And so public schools are really the only spot where we can see each other as humans, which is why this is so dangerous, because the folks who are fighting against this have a worldview that says that if you can take the majority of us who are pretty much living all the same conditions and convince one set of that majority that they're different than another set of that majority, then they can exploit all of us and just get rich off of all of us, right? So public schools are really the only place where we can do something different about that left in our society. Right? They were probably the only places we ever really had, right? Unions and public schools are kind of the only places that we connect across these divides. And so when we talk about what are the long-term consequences of this, the long-term consequences of we don't have the possibility for multiracial democracy if we can't know each other. If we lose public schools, we can't know each other. Right, and so we have to hold on to the central role, like you were naming before the difficult experience about having been bused across town, right? But that was also part of a really remarkable social, transformation process that was about, hey, if we can't change the housing laws to desegregate our communities, how can we get people knowing each other, right? And these same folks, guess what they did? They fought against that. When they got power in Wake County Public Schools in 2008, they eliminated those busing programs, right? Because they knew implicitly the danger, right, of us being together and seeing each other as humans across these divides, because then they can't lie to us about each other if we know each other, right? And then they can't take everything from us if we believe in each other instead of them.
So under Republican control, state lawmakers have made about a third of school boards partisan, and they are now floating the plan to elect the State Board of Education in gerrymandered districts. What impact, if any, do you see this having on our schools?
Anybody want to go first?
If any. If any. So I get lots of messages from teachers all the time. Recently was in New Hanover County, and it may be similar in other counties. At every school board meeting, and their school board is all Republican but one, the Proud Boys stand in the back and intimidate. They wear a mask, which is interesting since they're anti-mask people, but they are there to keep teachers and families silent. I think the biggest thing, and something that NCAE taught me, is we have to be loud, because the loud people, right, who are intimidating, who are threatening, who are talking about things that are so unimportant, right, and in lots of ways aren't even true. That the last New Hanover County Board meeting, they made a policy around transgender middle school students. If you want to have that debate, I'm willing to have it with you in civil discourse and talk about it. But what happens is they talk about kids as if they aren't even human. And they make that we are setting the tone on these partisan school boards, right? That the children don't matter. What matters is my political belief system, my religious belief system, my agenda. We're not saying what do our students need. So when we talk about these partisan school boards, it's out of control in a lot of places. I know there are places where teachers' names are being floated on social media because of the way they vote, right? And they feel intimidated. There are places where parents can't even come to a school board meeting because of all the loudness and sometimes we even had to shut school board meetings down, right? That's not who we are as a state. We really aren't. And so those of us that feel like that is not democracy, not constitutional, not helping our children, whether you have a child or not, we need to be loud and say that is unacceptable. And no one in New Hanover County is telling the school board this is unacceptable. To me, you got a bunch of men in the back being intimidating. They need to go.
I just want to share one thing that happened to me. Usually in our committee meetings, and I'm on the K-12 committee, during COVID, if you can remember, we shut down and went to virtual schools. And we were discussing the reopening of schools, and this was at the beginning of the pandemic. The Republicans had a bill, a piece of legislation, that they wanted to close schools, reopen schools regardless, you know. And I asked one of them, why would you want to do that? And he said, because we need to take over the schools, and if we say it loud enough, that we have people out there that will believe it, and they'll go to the board, the school board, and they'll make enough noise that it'll change. Yep. Now I'm just saying, listen to that. I just couldn't believe a legislator would say that in a committee meeting for the people to hear. Right. And it was like, we've got to make sure our agenda is heard. So this is one way we can stir people up. They can go and we can get new board members. So I think this bill that they're now trying to pass, the election of our state board of education, is the worst bill that we can have, because they're trying to align it with our congressional districts. And when we were doing the congressional districts, one of our Republican leaders said to us, and he said it in our assembly, that if he could, he would draw districts such that there would be an 11-1. That is before we got the two new legislative districts. Now, that is telling you something. Our state is divided. We have people of all walks of life, and you're going to draw districts so that there is only one viewpoint going to Washington, D.C. So if that is the case with the congressional districts when they drew them the last time, but this time they're evenly divided. But if that was the idea last time that they gerrymandered the districts, then can you imagine what's going to happen with the election of State Board of Education?
Yeah, so, partisanship is a problem. Certainly, introducing that to the state board would be a real big problem. But also just want to point out the partisanship at the Supreme Court level, the North Carolina Supreme Court, and how that's affecting our public schools. The Supreme Court in November ruled under the Leandro case that the state has to provide the funding. And in the November election following that ruling, the court flipped. Now we just saw this past week that legislative leaders have submitted legal filings to have that ruling just from November reheard in front of the Supreme Court. And that is really unprecedented. Normally when a Supreme Court rules on something, that's settled law, and it's not supposed to be brought back unless things have materially changed. And nothing has materially changed between November of 2022 and February of 2023 other than the partisanship of the Supreme Court. And so we're seeing partisanship being used to deny students their basic rights before the Supreme Court. So I just want to make sure to point that out.
Yeah, and Chris brought up the Supreme Court, which is actually what I was itching to do. But a history lesson is that our appellate courts, the Supreme Court, used to be nonpartisan, just like our school boards, right? And that was a very intentional act to make those partisan, to get the exact result that we've gotten now. And so, you're talking about years of investment in a process change that yields really important results. Everybody looks super sad right now. And I get that, and I wasn't going to go there with Leandro, but Chris brought it up. It's concerning, but I think what it means is that we have to be planning for a time when we can't just say Leandro and have it mean something specific. And that doesn't mean we don't talk about it now. I think we need to talk about Leandro as the promise of at least that bare minimum that's not being met. We should continue to talk about it, but we should also be educating ourselves, myself included, about what all the pieces are of Leandro, and let's be talking about those separately as well, so that if we lose the stamp of the Supreme Court on Leandro, if that happens, then we won't be caught flat-footed. That we'll be ready to start talking about some of these other components. And it comes back to, I think, they yell at Democrats like, don't tell us to vote, do something. Okay, we're trying, but we are really in a place, we are going to be at a place very shortly where the only thing we can do is just work and work and work to try to take back legislative power, because legislative power is just becoming massive in this state, and they're working on it and every day you see a bill about limiting the governor's power. And let's put a pin in that. Like, if you were Mark Robinson, wouldn't you be mad right now? Like that your party doesn't even think you're going to win? But anyway, so, there's a question there, I think, about whether, if he starts to sort of push back against these limits on gubernatorial power, that's great, but we can't count on that. They're acquiring power. We need to be working towards taking that power back for people who want to, promote public education and other public goods.
So on the question of partisanship and local school boards and elections, I want to talk for a second about a term I just came up with in my head, the politics of the amygdala, right? And I'm a social studies teacher by trade, so shout out to the guys holding it down with the history lessons. But to be an educator means to study brains, right? And there's a little bitty part in the back of our brainstem called the amygdala, right? And what the amygdala has done for us historically, it's a remarkable little creature. What it does is it receives the stimuli from the rest of our body, right? And so when the amygdala senses some danger, it actually gets the frontal core of your brain, where you're more sophisticated, more long-term kind of thinking about the consequences of things, to shut down. And the historic and beautiful function of that is, for thousands of years, we've been an incredibly vulnerable species. And if there's some saber-toothed tigers rustling over here in the bushes, your brain shuts down and doesn't go through well, should I run, or what are it just goes, it just reacts, it just responds to the thing, right? It's just a trained response. And so that's the way that the folks who are trying to reshape our society do politics, right? So if we think about Reconstruction and the remarkable successes for the majority, the overwhelming majority of people in this state, except for the folks who wanted to continue to control our state as a racist autocracy, they made up a story about these dangerous black male sexual predators, right? And they snatched up people's amygdalas, and everybody stopped thinking about the reality of the world around them and what was actually happening, right? Well, the current version of that is the radical communist CRT history teacher and the transgendered kid, right? Like you could Google me and find the videos they've made about me with students who weren't even in my classes, right? We're that same now. How do you talk to a set of folks about there is some danger. There is someone coming for you. There is someone trying to take something from you. When the reality is like, yeah, it's y'all. You've been taking stuff from all of our folks for hundreds of years at this point. But if I can convince you that there is something imminently scarier and dangerous, more dangerous right in front of your face, I can get the front of your brain to shut down. So when we get into this thing, even just the politics of Republican and Democrat is like amygdala politics, right? It's like you just get folks seeing this red or seeing this blue, and then you forget about everything else, right? So we've said this a number of times in this room. If you take polls, the majority of people in this state, overwhelmingly, the majority of the people in this state say we need strong public schools. They need to be funded dramatically better than they are, and that's across party. Right? So the reality is like we've got to figure out how to counter this and how to come up with a politics that talks about naming what the real dangers are for our folks, because the other side is really expert. They're masters of manipulating our amygdalas, right? And so what they know is if they take these catchphrases down to the local level, Republican, Democrat, CRT, transgender kid, right? That they've seen historically over and over and over again how that can be used manipulate us as people, right? And so I think that's the thing that we've got to look at and got to understand at the center of this, and start talking past some of these catchwords that they use that just grip all of us up and make us stop thinking.
So in our last panel, we had quite a few good questions come up, and it seemed like we started to run out of time, so I wanted to make sure that we gave time. Perfect. Would you like to read it?
All right, we had a comment come in from the chat. There are some right-wing critics who contend that teacher pay has actually risen by 20%. Chris, Brian, Representative Gill, Senator Grasstein, would anyone like to take that on? Is that true?
I'll start, and then other people can put the numbers on it, right? I came into teaching in 2004. Right? I was working at a moving company 2 weeks into the school year because people wanted to teach in this state. I couldn't get a job. We had 90% healthcare coverage, right, for free. Now it's 70-30 that we got to pay for, right? There was a 5-year gap in there where my check, y'all know this, every single month was the same check. Well, the cost of living goes up every month, y'all. So what I did was take a pay cut every single month. So when they talk about these small bumps that they've made over the course of the last 10 years, what they're relying on, right, is an unsophisticated group of people saying, oh, well, we've seen that, but we didn't see the costs that are coming out every single other place. So we don't even actually have to look very far to just do a little bit of like, what does money buy you in 2008 versus what it buys you now? But I'm sure Chris will get that for us in a second. But like on no measure can they say that this is accurate. And if it was, why would we be facing the crisis that we're facing right now? I don't believe them, right? Even if their numbers did add up, the folks who have spent their whole lives, like people who have become teachers, that's because our grandmamas were teachers. We grew up playing school with our homies. Like this is what we wanted to do our whole lives. And now we're leaving. We wouldn't be leaving if what they said was true.
All I want people to understand, when they say they're giving teachers a 2% increase, they look at what they call the average teacher's pay. If you take 2% and multiply it times $35,000, that's not very much of a monthly increase for each teacher.
Yeah, and Brian hit on all the stuff about cost of living increases and how nominal increases are don't tell the full story there. But I think just want to reiterate, there's a reason that Taylor's question started off with how North Carolina teacher salaries relate to other industries in North Carolina, because what's important is how we can have salaries that attract and retain the best and the brightest into the teaching profession. And that happens, that's not looking at salaries in North Carolina versus salaries in South Carolina or salaries in Virginia. It's looking at salaries for Carolina versus salaries for accountants, computer programmers, so on and so forth, to make sure that we're attracting and retaining the best and the brightest.
Yeah, I would just add one other data point that you'll see that's becoming, I think, a talking point is there's a chart that shows that is being put out by some that says that North Carolina is actually 13th in what we spend on education. And what they're looking at is allocations based on state versus local. And so obviously every state has a different funding system, so just be wary of charts that you see where it looks like things are actually better in North Carolina, because there's a little asterisk that explains where the data kind of falls apart. So that I would say that. And then I think the other thing is that people have a lot of common sense, and what Brian said about if this were true, then why would people be leaving? People get that. I don't think we need to show them the charts. I think we just need to point to what's happening on the ground, and people understand that.
And I want to build on what you just said about the 13th. So the North Carolina Public School Forum had their Eggs and Issues event last week. And they opened up by saying, and I don't remember the exact number, but either 48th or 49th in pupil spending. I think it's 48. At 48, okay. And the panel talked. The panel sits down. Republican Mike Lee, who is the chair of the Appropriations Committee for Education, said in the Senate, it's actually 13th. And nobody called him on it. And so what bothers me is that, yeah, we have common sense, but when people act like they have numbers, when they act like they have the answer, I mean, the science of reading, I could talk about that for days. There's not one answer, and so they're throwing out things that, what's the thing called? Amygdala? Yeah. They're getting their amygdala. Oh, we're 13th, we're doing well, right? Teachers make a lot of money. So I think we need to teach more critical literacy. Criticality, and we should hold our politicians to a higher standard with some, Chris does a great job at political fact checking. He'll tell you I call him all the time. But even when I ran for state superintendent, we'd be this close and she'd just throw out some number and I'm like, where did she get that? We need to hold people to being honest. And if it is 13th as you described it, then he should have described it that way.
I just want to add one more thing really quickly, if it's okay, because we've been talking a lot about teacher pay, right? And I think the reality is that in order to make a school system run, there's a lot of folks who aren't teachers, right? And a lot of those folks have been living at $7.25, at $8.50, no days off, no health care, right? And so if these folks were so concerned with the success of our kids, right, and they're so concerned with raising the wages of everybody, like, why did they fire 7,000 TAs as soon as they came into power? Right? Like, that's 7,000 people who used to have jobs who then didn't anymore, right? Why, when they pass a law to give all state employees a $15 minimum wage, did they exclude education workers in that, right? So if you talk about bus drivers, custodians, front office staff, right, teacher assistants, all the folks that make our school buildings run in the same way that teachers do and are just as vital, right? Like, they're not even willing to have a conversation to pretend like they're paying those folks adequately. They're just saying, like, nah, we're not even going to talk about them, and we're going to make up stories about what we do with teachers.
And please correct me if I'm wrong on this, but I am pretty sure that, Republicans will brag that they've given teachers a 2% raise, but they won't acknowledge things like, at the beginning, I believe it was starting in 2021, new teachers hired no longer qualified for retiree medical benefits. So that means anybody who's getting hired in North Carolina is not, when they retire, unless something changes by the time they retire, they will not qualify for retiree medical benefits. And I know you're talking about instructional assistants. I was a special education teacher. I had instructional assistants in my classroom. One of my instructional assistants was, he had his wife and his son that he was caring for, and he came to work with us from 6:50 a.m. to 2:30 p.m., where he would immediately leave to go work at a group home from 3 p.m. to midnight to get up to be at school at 6:50 a.m. the next morning to do it all over again. Because if he didn't do that, he wasn't making ends meet. So I know that that's a really big issue that we have in our state. I want to, again, open it up if anyone else has any questions. Yes, I'll bring the microphone over here.
So I'm a kind of old guy. I was born in 1951 in a little town called Plymouth, which is in northeastern North Carolina. I went grades 1 through 8 at 4th Street Elementary School, which was the colored school. in Plymouth. Total of 19 years of education. The most impactful educator in my life was Mr. Edison Tao, who was my one of my eighth grade teachers. He's someone that I would visit when I would come home after I moved away, because he meant so much. But my point is, what about black male teachers and how we get more black male teachers and why we don't have more? I know it might be a complicated issue, but part of it is, I think, the financial piece, and there could be other reasons. We got to do that.
Hi, I'm a black female, and when I was going through my program at UNCG, when I was going to the schools, even in my cohort, I never felt welcome. I always felt like the outsider. I always felt like I was too big for the program, and I experienced some racist behavior with, I'm sure y'all know, we call them Austies, who is just my cooperating teacher, basically. And so I would say that's probably why it's not really a space for us. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think the reality is we have to start with creating good experiences in schools for black boys that are in school, right? It starts there, right? If we don't have kids having good experiences in the thing, why are they gonna see themselves possibly being in the thing, right? And so I think that becomes a responsibility of everybody, right? It's like right now, right? What is it that we need to do in order to make sure that all of our kids are getting the space to be their full human selves and not have to face the sort of contempt, the fear, just kind of, you know, I was in to middle school in Charlotte the other day, watching kids walk through a metal detector, right? These are like 12-year-old kids, right? And so I think there's part of it that is certainly that, right? Part of it is just kind of like, what is it that we need to do to shift how racism and sexism work in our society to create openings for everybody everywhere, right? And so what that means is that we have to be able to look at where there are gaps, where data is showing us that, like, oh, there's a set of folks who don't feel like this is a place for them, and then start having conversations with those folks, right? What is it you need, right? What is it that you need to be able to enter this profession? What is it you need to be able to sustain yourself in this profession? And then let's reorganize ourselves around that. Right? We've seen, I mean, I think to counter some of the, like, what feels hopeless about a lot of these conversations is that, like, we've seen human beings make policy decisions and resource decisions that take us in the wrong direction. We can then do it in the right. You know, if somebody made it wrong, then we can figure out how to make it right. And so I think that's a lot of where the conversation needs to start, is to say, you know, have conversation with boys in school. Like, what would it mean? What would it take for you in order to see yourself in this role? Because we need you in this role. Right? Just like, kind of, again, similar. There's nothing, black boys are not unicorns, they're humans, right? Just like everybody else. We just haven't afforded the space for that. And so I think we need to figure out how to extend and open that space.
When I ran for state superintendent, in case I won, which I didn't, I wanted things in place. And the first thing I did was get a team around me, and the team was a diverse team. And my right-hand person was a man of color. And I said, how do you get teachers of color? You have to show them that there are opportunities above the classroom as well, right? I also said, and Chris was in on some of my conversations, is that we have to start at the top. So I was planning on, how do we have really important conversations about race in schools, and it has to start at DPI, right? We have to do it first, and let it go down. Losing was bad, but losing and watching not only us not move forward, but us move backward has been painful. One of the first decisions made was to take the term systemic racism out of our standards, right? So we're on a path going the wrong way. And I think the way to turn it around is get someone in positions of power that want to level the playing field and want to improve schools and opportunities beyond school for every person.
I know I want to add real quick that I think another thing that would be really great is making higher education more accessible as well, because there are so many people, especially people of color, who do not have the ability to go to college to become educators without going in incredible debt that isn't going to be paid off by their teacher's salary. So I think making college more accessible is a big part of that.
Our dean made a goal before we all started, going financially under that anyone who comes to UNCG to be a teacher is tuition free. And he was going to work on that towards private donors, right? Why not? Teachers spend so much money just student teaching, right? Because they can't work, meaning the student teachers. If Maya went into it, she couldn't work. She's working full time. She's not getting paid. Plus she has college debt. And then she gets out and makes 25% less than someone else. And so if North Carolina, I know we have teaching fellows, but it should be for anyone who meets the requirements and wants to be a teacher, gets tuition free.
And then, okay, we have a question over here real quick, and then we'll be wrapping it up.
To go along with what they just said, I'm a principal at an inner city school in Goldsboro, North Carolina, and I've got the unique perspective. I was a principal at a affluent school for 15 years in Wayne County. But then I was moved to this school 3 years ago to turn it around. And one thing I've noticed is the school is literally in the middle of the projects. But what we have is you have about 85% of the students that don't know how to be students. Most students at the affluent school would come in, regardless of who the teacher was, regardless of how good the teacher was, would sit down, do what the teacher asked, and be compliant. So at an inner city school, you have 85% about that are not compliant. And so, but then what I have a problem with is the allotments that are giving. We have the same allotment at my school as another middle school in the same county for teacher allotments, when, in other words, you can't have a class size of 28 students in my school where they're non-compliant students, and then 28 students at another school. It's a different playing field. And to have schools, so it's a much bigger problem than just the education, because then when you get down to the lower tiered schools, the schools that are the inner city schools, they are at such a disadvantage. You don't have the best teachers. You don't, because there's not that increase in pay even for them. It's just, it's a real shame because of I really could see the difference, and where there's much more need where I'm at right now.
So in my other job, I call the General Assembly my side hustle. In my real job, I'm a lawyer and I do disability rights work. And so we have a saying kind of in the disability arena, particularly around behavioral health issues, is that behavior is communication, right? So those kids know where they are, right? They know whether they've been respected with adequate resources, so I think there's a lot to be said for making sure that the resources match the needs of the kids in the school system. So I hear what you're saying, and I think that is a problem that is part of what gets ignored when we start talking about the data and folks kind of play with the numbers a little bit, the way Jen was talking about, is you can say, well, we're investing this much, but the problem is we're relying so much on the local, the county and the local schools to invest in their schools, and the state's not carrying its load. That was Leandro, right? That's the whole premise of Leandro, is that the schools that have the highest needs were getting the least. And so I think, to me, that's a great sort of pulling together of all the issues that we've been talking about. Is those are the kids who are suffering, the ones who need the most in terms of, kind of reparations around like what they haven't gotten to this point in their education, and we're failing them.
Awesome. So if we can give a round of applause for our second panel here. And thank you, everyone, for tuning in. Let's give it a round of applause for our Chicken and Beasley's people as well. And then a round of applause for everyone, for yourselves, for Carolina Forward, for ta-da. Thank you guys for tuning in.